started installing. So these are some of the installations where we have to focus it. Right now in New York, they're all focused. Over the past few days, we put it up every year, but about a week before, we always have to focus it. We try to do it for the shortest amount of time, and then turn it off until 11. So this is what it looks like standing in the middle of them, which I think is such a peculiar view because it's almost like you're in this box. And also, it's the most peculiar view. Has anyone here seen it in person? Yeah, beautiful. It's so tall that if you're, say, up down and you're looking at it, it looks like it's kind of bending up towards you. But then if you turn around, so you're facing the opposite direction, and you look up, you can still see it because it's just so tall. It feels like it's above you, and that's a weird thing. If you're walking around, it almost feels as public and as big as it is to be this very personal thing, as if it's kind of following you around. So I always say that there's more kind of interpretations than, as many interpretations of it as the event. But one that so kind of struck and held my imagination was a rescue worker. So 6 months later, said that he thanked us, and he said, for 6 months we've been down here, and people come, and everyone stares into the pit. Everyone's just looking down, and we're digging, and every once in a while we find some things. But after the lights went up, that was the first time in memory that people just started to look up. So I thought that's a pretty apt metaphor. So this was, I always wanted to have a picture from space, but was unable to get one. So back to Photoshop. And that was on the 10-year anniversary. Okay. So that has been a yearly installation, so it'll be up this weekend. Usually it goes up on the 10th, and then you don't turn it off, because that was one thing that we really had a lot of kind of reaction to. But once it was up, people said, don't turn it off, because that'll kind of re-trigger the kind of PTSD, that experience of loss. So basically, the sun comes up in the morning of the 12th, and then we turn it off. All right. So now, big time kind of shifting gears, back to light, back to a different sort of scale. In 2007, I decided to make a new body of work. So there's a lot of work before, but then here's a lot of work after, right? So I'm going to go sort of quickly through here, but I wanted to talk a little bit about process as it relates to that initial idea. What's the similarity between the scientific method and the artistic method? All right, so I'll just show you one of these things, and then kind of unpack them a little bit. All right, so I call these things glittering machines, but they are interactive, illuminating, kinetic, modular sculptures. So as you sort of enter into space with them, they have these sensors that allow different interactions. Okay. All right. So a little bit about the process is, when I, 2006, 2007, said, all right, I'm going to start a new body of work. I said, well, I want to shape light, and I want to shape space, so light and space. And I was thinking about these gestures. And here's where that scientific method, it's like, well, finding your question, doing research are so intertwined. So I was thinking like, oh, I remember seeing, a bush at night. And when I accidentally brushed up against the bush, it illuminated with so many fireflies. So it was just like an image, kind of stuck. And then that gesture, that kind of motion that stuck. It's like, well, all right, well, that is, I guess it's research, right? But then the question is, well, can I replicate that? What would it be like to replicate? What would that be a new kind of interaction between a person and a work of art? So I was thinking about these other kind of gestures and these other ways, again, to take light, shape it, and then as a result, shape space. So I was doing these gesture studies. And then from here, I was like, all right, I have in my mind some gestures, some motions. So how am I going to do that? So I kind of went back to, and here's the funny thing about maybe science and art again, that research part. My wife is a clinical psychologist, and she jokes in clinical psychology, like when she went to school, everyone kind of introduced themselves, and everyone knew that looking around, that their specialty was going to be not their research project, but their me-search project. So basically, they were kind of looking for something that really had to do with their kind of personhood and identity. So I think that actually is a great analogy too with art and artists, because ultimately it is this sort of me-search, like kind of what drives you, or what confuses you, or what I don't know, like what are you really curious about? So to talk about the system, I remember so many, countless hours as a kid playing Lego, and that really stuck with me. Maybe it has to do with like not being that social, or not being that athletic, whatever, or trying to understand space. But I just remember so clearly, absolutely being obsessed with Lego. So I wanted to make my own. I wanted to make my own set. So I was thinking modular, how do you make some modular pieces of systems? And then I was like, all right, I gotta look at kinetic stuff, because that's the motion. So there's a lot of engineering, static systems, dynamic system mechanisms, and then the illuminating part, what's going on with electric light, like what are the technologies? And then lastly, the interactive stuff. Like I knew that there's increasingly this world of interaction. Now they call it the Internet of Things, but in 2007 that wasn't invented yet. But I was like, all right, how to have these things interact with people. So this, in a sense, was my research project, and those are the areas that I said, all right, I gotta investigate. So the modular, looking back at the history of, especially around the kind of Industrial Revolution, steam engine, there are so many unbelievable mechanisms for creating motion, for shaping motion, from circles to lines, incredible kind of history of that, and ingenuity. So looking at that, developing my own, with the technologies that I had access to, and sort of tweaking and customizing it, seeing like, all right, I can take 4-bar linkage and make it do this, some gear systems, whatever, basic sort of physics and machine stuff. And I started kind of building, again, the set of the Lego, with my own kind of customized thing. And then, this is what allowed me to do it. There's a lot of new technologies that basically can take stuff from a computer out into the real world. So this is a laser cutter. So basically, we design some pattern on a computer, This allows you to cut it. And this one cuts wood and plastic. There's others that cut metal. So 10 years ago, this was not really, or 15 years ago, it wasn't so accessible, but increasingly, right? So then the interactive part. Has anyone here messed around with Arduino at all? Oh yeah, cool. So it's this little microprocessor there, Arduino, 23 bucks. But that is, these Italian people got together and said, they had artist design firms. They said, why is it so hard to mess around with electronics? Like, why do you have to go and get a degree in electronics engineering and computer science? So they thought, yeah, that's a good point. So they tried to come up with their system of an interactive electronic system that would take inputs and give outputs. So if you think about your computer, the input is your keyboard. So that's, does a lot, your keyboard. But let's say you switch that out with any material property you think of, like temperature, humidity, presence of someone. Those are sensors, those are inputs. So with Arduino, you can put any type of sensor in there to get input. So output, if you think about a computer, the output's on your screen. Or maybe you print paper, that's the output. But if you switch out the screen with some other outputs, well, you can have motors, you can have robotic arms, you can have lights, you can have sounds. So that's the output. So this little $23 thing, that's the kind of the brain. Inputs, it's up to you, your imagination. Output, what can you do with it besides just looking at something on the screen? And that is the Internet of Things. But they sometimes